Season opener of the CIS and Senteon webinar series, How to Secure Your Endpoints with the CIS Benchmarks. This season is all about browser hardening. Specifically for the first half of the season, we will be talking about Chrome hardening, and then we'll lead into Edge and Firefox. So really excited to kick off this season with an old friend, Matt Lee. Honestly, the cybersecurity wizard. You have been almost to every show, as we just talked about. Didn't make Flow this year, but everywhere else I've been, you've always been there, man. I don't know how you manage it all.
You know what's funny? That's every speaking badge I've ever had since 2017. So every one of those are somewhere where I had to prep a presentation and speak about something. So yeah, it's good to be here, brother. I'm happy to be here.
I might reach out to you a little bit after to get some mentorship, as I'll be giving my first speaking engagement. So, all right, awesome.
Let us know if you're here in the chat. We're officially off for Juneteenth, and but I wanted to come hang out with my buddy Zach and talk about cybersecurity because I'm a nerd. So let us know if you're here.
No days off for real nerds, right? Awesome. So just kicking off some housekeeping. Again, we are Senteon. We are a platform to automate the hardening and remediation of CIS benchmarks, configurations on workstations, servers, and browsers. And I am going to share my screen and show a little housekeeping, how to follow the webinar series and stay in touch with the episodes to know what's going on week after week. We can just get this pulled up onto the stream. Heading over to senteon.co, which the link is in the chat, you can scroll on down and you can see each webinar that we did, and you can click right into it, or you can head to the YouTube page. And then I do my best to create blogs on every episode. I'm working on getting a little bit more creative with this episode and doing a theme per episode. So we'll see if I can keep that up. These blogs take a lot of time. Outside of that, you can also head to that website and click log in. This will take you to a sign up page for a free evaluation. The big thing with this is a gift from us to you for joining the webinar series and being just someone who cares about configurations, because as Matt and I know, not everyone prioritizes the topic that we're going to dive into today, and hopefully we get some better answers as to why from Matt.
Color me shocked.
But the big thing here is this is completely free and a gift to you. CIS provides all of these recommendations, and we went ahead and took their recommendations and crosswalked it against regulatory frameworks. So this way, when you talk to your clients or just talk to your leadership about why configuration management is important and needs to be prioritized, now you can have a backing database with reasoning. CIS also goes as far to explaining these settings. So if you ever don't know what something is, you can click into the setting, learn about the pathway, the explanation of the setting, machine key, and everything else. But the cool part is CIS also tells us why it crosswalks to the regulatory framework. So we have CMMC here, HIPAA, right? All of these explanations are free and available thanks to CIS. So huge shout out to them for doing all of that hard work for us to build our company. But very cool. Getting into the gritty of the technical webinar series. So Matt, I introduced you a little bit, man, but huge shout out to you just as a person, right? You were one of the first people to do market research with Senteon. You said we had a good idea. Go build the thing. we built the thing, and I hope you've really kept that. I feel like you've kept that personality as you've matured and become the person you are today. I mean, taking those cold LinkedIn messages is not easy, and I imagine you probably get 10 a day. Is that fair?
How else do you learn, though? How else do you learn what's out there? I also want to shout out to Zach B, who said, "Hi, guys. Hope you're doing well." And also has a lot of the same letters I have. And Zach, maybe in the comments, tell me what you thought of the PNPT. It's probably my favorite exam I've ever taken. I cried. I laughed. We all had fun. So just curious what your thoughts were on that, on the PNPT. Okay, Zach, so why are we passionate about this? Why do I care so much? You know, I did a breakdown where I love to take modern breaches and then analyze them on where their failures were presumptively, and obviously making some assumptions, but presumptively where their failures were along the CIS safeguards. Like, where did they not do well? And one of the ones that stands out to me as we talk about this is the Cisco incident, right? That Talos did a great write-up of. If you haven't found that, go find the Talos write-up of the Cisco incident. And as I broke through it, I did a talk, and it was a long-form, hour-long talk. But I was walking through where they had made, presumptive failures. And one of the ones that stands out the most, and it's still in most organizations, and I would ask you this right now. Can you go in your browser, Google or Edge, I don't care which. Well, maybe you can use all you want, and then hell, you're already answering this question for me. But can you go in your browser on your corporate device and add your personal profile? Can you go up there and say, let's bring my other mini-mat into this scenario? If the answer is yes, then I think people have misinterpreted the intention of 9.1 and 9.2 and the extensibilities in 9 of CIS that say that I need to have the ability to manage my browsers. I need to have supported browsers. Now, they don't go so far as to say supported equals, right? If you look at 9.1, it says, use only supported browsers. That means that you're using in 2.1 your set of software that you have approved. You at least have a list of software. You're only allowing it to run, which hopefully you're down to the browser level and saying, hey, it's Chrome, or it's Edge, or it's Edge and Chrome, or it's Opera, or it's Brave, or it's whatever the hell you think you can support. But when you get into it, why is 9.1 say use only supported? Now, if you think about the actual answer, it's, well, because you need to stay up to date. Well, what's 7 for? Then that means 9.1 has a different flavor. And I think what in my mind it comes to is the ability to manage, the ability to say, no, stupid, you can't store your work password in the browser and sync it back to your Google profile so some jackass can put in your Google profile and have access to your work password. No, that's not okay. Well, how do you do that? Hey, Zach, in accounting, I'm going to really need you not to store. Or do you change the freaking setting? Do you take control of the browser? Do you take and make sure that you can actually manage it? Now, that can be done with GPOs. That can be done with tools. That can be done with CASBs. That can be done with a lot of things that allow you to solve some of these problems. But at the end of the day, if you're not thinking about that, that's the only takeaway I want you to have out of this conversation, is that you need to be managing your browsers, because that's where new identities get born, and that's where your identity gets stolen. And Zach, I hope that gives you an opener into what I think is the causal problem here.
I love it.
People aren't managing browsers. So.
And I did drop that Talus white paper. So if you want to read about the Cisco breach, it's right there in the LinkedIn comments. But Matt, that's a spot on opening. I mean, these managed browsers, how are people, IT is already busy, right? How are we going to allow any browser that they want, any flavor of Chromium, whatever that is, if IT's already strapped?
Louder for those in the back.
So as an MSP, how can, I have a good question, but I told myself I was going to change the format here, Matt. I'm going to write down my question. I'm going to come back because
selling on this with me, I'm going to drive you in the ground.
You don't want to fall down the rabbit hole, but I have a format that I'm working on sticking to, and this format is going to be a question. So if we have any future guest speakers coming up, you will get asked this same question. So Matt, what is the most unusual place you've ever worked from to secure a network?
Where's the most unusual place I've ever worked from to secure a network? Okay, this is also maybe a bad client story. so we'll put this in. I've been asking this dude to make some changes on something in his VMware stack. And I don't remember the exact details anymore. And he ignored me. And he's that guy. And everybody's had this client. I'm on vacation. I'm actually riding my fat butt. I was like 305 pounds at this time, up a 4,000-foot climb in Vegas. I was actually doing the Red Rocks loop, right? And I'm like, nice. I'm crying. I'm dying. I'm laying there with my fat butt panting. And I get a call. And then another call and another call. And so right there at the top of the stop, before you go back down the mountain, I actually had to stop and fire up my phone and make a ticket for my team to go make a change. This guy's finally wanting to do it. And said, if you don't change this right now, I'm going to fire you. That guy. Now, granted, that guy bought me this really dope floating light thing that I still have in my office. So I guess there's the tchotchke that comes from that, but he was a total tool. Anyways, that was my strangest place I've ever administered a network, was sitting on the top of a mountain at a bicycle ride.
That question was so much better than I could have anticipated.
I'm sure there's others. Now, if you'd asked me how I took down single-handedly a network for a defense contractor that is a global defense contractor, that's a whole different story. And I can tell you that you definitely don't like VTP if you have a really old switch you pull out and try to use. Let's just put it that way. He asked me how I know.
All right, going back to that question I had. So IT staff's already busy with these. Yeah. How can you have every flavor of Chromium and just allow your MSP as all of your clients to use whatever they want, or even vary client to client?
And it's also a passion area. And I'll tell you why, Zach. My sons, I administer my house like you would administer a business, right? I use a Microsoft domain. I sign into everything with SSO. It's a real problem and it costs a lot. But I run my house that way and my kids are set up that way. And I had some policies I was trying to implement. And I'm like, why is this not working? What are we dealing with? What do you mean you're using Opera? No, I'm not. No, this is not okay. And you know what I mean? It's those kind of things you have to fight. And so the other thing I was going to say is it's a passion thing. My kids didn't care that much, but it's what they liked. It's what they knew. It's the one thing that let them do something they enjoyed doing the best. And so like browsers are one of those things I think IT professionals and security professionals just haven't really decided to fight. Just as a grander percentage of the populace, right?
So that's exactly what I want to dive into, Matt. It's easy to fight your kids to get off Opera, but can an MSP actually fight their clients to only use Edge or only use Chrome? Is that their battle? Can it be their battle?
I think it's a matter of choosing your battle lines. I think the problem is if you believe, and I may be wrong, but if you believe that most of a small business's client consumption is identity centric, third-party SaaS tools, and using OAuth or SAML or other methodologies, right? So it's most of the time that's what we're dealing with. Hopefully we're dealing with. Then that means that the one place that all data transpires, the one place that all identities meet is the browser. And you're now telling me that I can bring whatever browser I want without any restraints? Like I would choose to fight a battle line that I understood. I wouldn't choose to have, let's draw a card and see where we're going to fight today, boys. Like, I just don't think that's the best methodology. So, I mean, not to be hyperbolous or get too much into rhetoric, but it is ridiculous to think that if I was going to go through the stuff we're going to talk about today, Zach, and then try to implement that across all browsers, I would have a problem of variables that I would not be able to meet, right? I'd have n squared, n cubed, whatever number it is of this to try to apply to every different browser type or try to be able to do that. And they just don't work that way. Yes, Chromium centric and Chrome start to edge towards the same thing.
Nice.
Excuse me. I apologize. But, you do still have so many offshoots that aren't controllable in that same way. So I don't want to beat the point to death, but yeah, it's silly.
That's absolutely perfect. And one other thing you said in your introduction was, I don't want my employees saving password to Chrome or anywhere else. I mean, I want to emphasize
where I want them to save it, right? And ideally, I don't want many passwords to save. I want identity centrism. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Yeah,
you're good. But I mean, I invited you to come to the CIS benchmark episode, and maybe you weren't aware, or maybe you were. Teach me. But a lot of my conversations when I talk about hardening Chrome, not saving passwords to the browser is like the one thing the majority of MSPs talk about, right? But in reality, the CIS benchmarks have about 90 different recommendations to secure a Chrome browser and 120 to secure an Edge browser, right?
Yeah,
did you know this going into this episode, or is that just knowledge that's not really out there?
I mean, well, that's a silly question, right? Because like I have
know everything.
I don't know everything. I take a lot of it down. I would say that I'm aware of how many things that aren't configured that way, and I think the grander conversation is we have a mantra with CISA, right? And you're familiar with, secure by design, secure by default. And secure by design speaks towards the, shitty code. Let's just be honest, right? People have code that lives for 20 years and it's crap. But then secure by default is like, why would we have all these settings on by default? Why is it I have to do the opposite? And I think we all know the answer. Convenience. It was all about consumer choice and convenience. It wasn't about security. They built the features to be on feature parity. They built the capabilities to meet certain stringent needs for a sale or for a deal or for somebody asking for it. But it wasn't turned on by default because it would cause pain. But as we go more and more centric to common use cases, as we're not using some jackass's 900-year-old website that needs cross-site scripting of some sort that's unknown or things of that nature, like we could get more common in these settings. We can disable so many more of these. Like there was a time when 3389 had to be on in every machine by default because by God, we were going to RDP into it and it needed to be easy. Well, now we're focusing on maybe that shouldn't be that way, right? And to your point on browsers, when benchmarks come into play, it's interesting because if you read the safeguard on the surface, there's 153 safeguards, right?
Yep.
The breadth of it is not meant to be exhaustive. Those safeguards, let that sink in. Those safeguards are not meant to be exhaustive. They're not every single thing one might do. They are the category.
Yes.
Yes, it might be implement DMARC, but how and what and which way I do that. And when you talk about hardening and setting configurations and you look at 4.1, you've seen the map, right? 4.1 is massive of all the things setting parameters upon that configuration process. And even that isn't exhaustive. There's thousands and thousands of settings like turn off the ports you're not using. Well, that's all the ports, 1 through 65,000. What, 535? Somebody correct me if I'm the idiot. I'm the other pen testers. I suck if I'm wrong on how many that is. But 65,000 ports, 1 through X. Like, how many of them need to be on? The ones that need. But that's not the way we approach it, right? We approach it with services on and WMIC on and all of the things on that we need. So I think, all right, I'll get off my soapbox. But the point is, there's tons and tons of settings, and all they've really done is said in the benchmarks, let's expand upon the actual safeguards at a more pragmatic and function system level, right? 65. I was right. Thank you, Matthew.
That was spot on, Matt.
I might show off how long I've been since I've turned a wrench and any attachments, but I still scan within maps, so it helps. But anyways, I think the point is there's hundreds of settings, and they're all in the benchmark set to not turn this into a benchmark sales process, but they're all set to, oh, you have Chrome. Let's talk about Chrome. Oh, you have this Active Directory. This talks about Active Directory, right? So yeah, and I love
this is a benchmark episode. Matt,
take it away and see what explodes. I'm a big fan.
Right.
And we also have Matthew saying +5 for browser puns. I appreciate you, bro. It's my heart. It's my
absolutely
heart.
Perfect. And talking about these safeguards, right? There's 153 of them. A big thing I want to emphasize in these episodes, I did change the slide. Honestly, let's go ahead and pull up the first slide, and I'll talk about the new format that I implemented. So go to the first setting if you don't mind. At the top of the slide here is going to be the CIS benchmark. This is written verbatim from the free PDF you can download from CIS. The same things can be pulled from the Senteon freemium version. It exists right here, right? And we're going to have a did you know and a why it matters on the left and right hand side, and a little just simple explanation at the bottom. The two new pieces here is the bottom left and the bottom right. So the bottom left is going to say where the CIS benchmark fits into the greater CIS controls that Matt absolutely is passionate about and has been talking about a lot of this episode. What's very interesting, and honestly, CIS out there, if you're listening, sometimes a bit annoying for us, not all of these CIS benchmarks fit back into the CIS controls explicitly. They chose that verbiage very particularly because just because it's not explicitly mapped does not mean it doesn't facilitate one of these controls.
It could be 4. This would all be 4. Like this would be 4.x in my opinion, right? Yep. Configuration management.
Absolutely. So that's that piece. In the bottom right, we have something called levels. A lot of people in this audience and familiar with CIS know about implementation groups. These are IG1, IG2, IG3. IG1 is what every business should be doing. And it's a combination of, Matt, how many safeguards? You got that number on hand?
What's that? Of
how many safeguards make up IG1?
53?
I don't know the answer. So 52? If we can have someone in the audience tell us if we're wrong.
Man, hold on. I have it right here. Yeah. So it's 7 plus 38 plus 1 plus 7 plus 3. So 10, 11, 49. 56. What a terrible human I am. I should have known that.
Math live on air, dude. You have more confidence than anyone else. And Andy's in the comments saying it is 53. So it looks like either your math was wrong or your equation was wrong.
I made it on a coin, so I'm pretty certain it's 56. Yeah.
But close. Okay. These implementation groups are going into the CIS controls for the ones to prioritize, right? But the levels, these are completely different. Levels are specific to CIS benchmarks. They have level 1 and level 2 for browsers, and they have a few other things depending on what set of benchmarks you look at. Level 1 is recommended for every single business to do. Level 2 is going to be for those higher security conscious. That's okay with a little bit of disruption or end user frustration, right? So that's the big thing I want to emphasize here before we get into these slides.
Yeah. Nice.
Awesome. Yep. So, Matt, anything you want to conclude and put a bow on before we hit the technical side of the presentation?
No, this is great, man. This is good.
All right, awesome. So, very first setting here, cross-origin HTTP authentication prompts is set to disabled. Why is this important to do?
Yeah, so that I can't just have an AITM or MITM type model pivot from a site that I've compromised and have an authentication space. And I've got some other nerds in the crowd. So, Zach, I'm looking at you. Correct me when I'm wrong. But cross origin allows me to have an authentication prompt that comes from a different site that I might control as a threat actor. And you think you're going to the original site, but the cross origin is allowed. So yeah, that's my thought on that.
Effectively, it can trick users to provide credential information and make, I mean, it's against phishing, right? I mean, that's a big thing that I don't think a lot of people realize. Everyone wants to mitigate the risk of a phish being successful. Hardening the browser is a big part of that battle. 100%. I mean, I guess again, this is the new format.
I know we're going to play trivia today, Zach, but I'm super excited about it. So thank you so much. This is fun.
You did have the presentation ahead of time. I'm not that mean to you. I mean, again, learning the new format, I'm going to get better at my time management. But this topic of phishing and wanting to mitigate that, why is the browser so critical to harden to mitigate the risk of a successful phish?
It's the only place. That's where I'm going to enter my stuff, right? That's the attack point. So when you think about the browser, when I do an evil Genix or any other type of AITM, like I was hacking in the browser. Even when I'm trying to get you to click on something and download it and use it here, it's going to happen at the browser level. So I think hardening and reducing some of that attack surface is a good idea. And maybe this is a great time to talk about this. Like, what is the difference between protect surface and attack surface, Zach, if we're playing trivia?
Protect surface and attack surface. I mean, the combination of that just sounds like the total vulnerable area that's available to attackers.
In my mind, is everything you own. Everything you have is something you need to protect. So the protect surface is equal to everything you own. Everything.
Okay.
Attack surface is what you choose to expose to be attacked. It's the thing that you let me go play against. Like, great example, I love using LLM and R poisoning against a domain controller, right? Why the fuck do you even leave it on? Like, why?
Why is it on by default? Let's talk about that.
By default. And I think this is the point that we're really making at a national level, but specifically to right now, is that we need to reduce your attack surface, right? You can't control your protect surface. It's everything you own. You can make better decisions what you buy, but once you bought it, you need to figure out how to reduce that attack surface. Well, this is a great example of that. Like, there's not sites that need to do that, and if they do come up, we'll deal with them as an exception. But why would we leave it by default where you can do anything? And same way with firewall. You go buy a firewall today, it's going to come with a default rule that says all internet out allowed. All in, not allowed. There's still attack surface on out allowed. That's how phishing could be protected. There's all kinds of things there. So I just want to make sure when people are thinking about this, your framing is, what can I do to reduce my attack surface, right? Like, you've done it as a little kid. Anybody ever get bullied? Like, you just didn't go walk by the bully, bro. You didn't go out there and be like, ha ha, nice to see you again, bully and friends. This is going to be a good day. No, you avoided them because that's what you were doing. You were reducing attack surface. You couldn't control the fact that maybe you weren't strong enough or that you were going to be picked on, but you could avoid that, right? And that's what we're talking about doing here. So anyways, back to the techie bits. But
attack surface versus protect surface. So actually, I have not heard that, but you might see a blog come from me on it once I study up on it, brother.
I would credit back to Kindervog specifically. That's not me. So
perfect. Awesome. Yeah. All right, let's get into this next setting here. So we have configure the list of domains on which safe browsing will not trigger warnings is set to disabled. A thing I want to emphasize here is, just like any GPO, there are quite a bit of double negatives. So when we say will not trigger and disabled, it will actually trigger, right? So be careful when you go through these.
Look at you, Microsoft.
Make sure you go through these and make sure you do what CIS says. They already did the hard work. It's already decided for you. You don't have to do a lot of this manual thinking. You have the answer key through free PDFs or if you use a third-party solution. But Matt, talk to us a little bit about this setting.
Yeah, so when you think about safe browsing, blocking legitimate domains, safe browsing is just more restricted browser and hardening. And they're referencing 9.3, which is interesting as a reference point for this, because 9.3 is talking about enforcing and updating network-based URL filters. So what we're getting at is, as an extensibility of a way to filter, one could use the built-in protections in the browser of hardening modes, right, and safe modes. And if you're an administrator, you know what safe mode is, because it's the first thing you disable when you set up a new server, so you can actually go to websites without 67 pop-ups with a green thing and a yellow thing going ActiveX. Are you sure? 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 But my point is, there's other ways to enforce this. There's other ways to deal with network-based URL filters. In fact, when you think about it, this wouldn't be the way I would think of a URL filter. But what you're really saying is, hey, unless it's on this positive list, then go ahead and send it through safe mode browsing. Protect me in that way, right? So it's an interesting way to look at this. Is this is a type of a URL filter, which is why they're making this description to 9.3. But really, what it comes down to is sandbox the stuff that you don't trust, and the stuff that you do trust, still inspect, but in other ways, right? And in this case specifically, it's about using safe browsing for that methodology in my mind. Is that a fair assertion?
I think that was very perfect. And one thing I want to add to it, we do talk about how these map to the CIS controls. Matt talked about 9.3 for this one, obviously. And I want to emphasize, by doing only the CIS benchmarks, by only hardening, you are not completing control 9.3. You are not fully attesting to the completion of, right? So that's one thing I really want to emphasize. All of the settings we talk about may feed into and help build your attestation story of meeting a various control, but this will not 100% complete a control. Matt, you obviously agree with that one.
You can never complete one. I mean, the irony is, when you think about it, I think this goes back to the age-old problem. If I give you a checklist, Zach, and I say complete this checklist, when you are done, you're done. That's how houses get built. That's how surgeries get performed. It's the way this functions. The problem is, my checklist can never encompass all of your scenarios. If I give you a checklist, let's call it CIS, 153 safeguards. When you go to apply 10.1 that says apply anti-malware, it doesn't just say on your endpoints that you think about, and that's what you're thinking about. It gets into every asset class: IoT, mobile, portable, servers, workstations, non-compute resources. Like, all of those things are part of that asset class. So the breadth of it's really large. The point is, CIS and giving you benchmarks, while they help you, they're common check boxes. They're common. Yep. You got punched in the face, don't get punched in the face this way. But as a security practitioner, you're always going to be thinking of, how do I improve this? What is relevant to me? What are those things that are unique to the way I function? How am I a little snowflakey? To quote Chris Roberts, because we're not all snowflakes, but how am I a little snowflakey? I'm going to test that with him, see if he's down with it. But yeah. All right.
Containers is a good comment that we just had from Zach in the audience.
Yeah.
Absolutely cool. Solid one. You mentioned surgery getting done, right? That's, you get it done and then you move on. But a big piece of these CIS benchmarks, although, it is all these best practice kind of a checklist to do once, even with surgery, you come back for your follow-ups. Just like with CIS benchmarks.
Yeah, I don't. You're supposed to.
To be honest, I don't either. Physical therapy isn't real. Birds are fake. And anyway, so even with surgery, you're coming back for those follow-up sessions, the checkups and PT, right? Just like with GPOs and CIS benchmarks, you need to confirm that they are actually remediated.
Some folks going to go in there and put star excluded, right? Like, he's like, all right, I'm just done with all this adding .coms and such. We're just doing star exclusions here.
Exactly. And there's potential for these settings to change after. And like, have you ever had an experience with PowerShell script, the setting changed for a point in time and then a week later it went right back? Like, that's not an unusual thing. Is that fair to say?
I don't often, but it's usually when I accidentally give local users local admin rights. I digress. Yes.
Spot on. All right, awesome. Let's go into this next setting here. Next one. All right. Safe browsing protection level is set to enabled, standard protection, or higher. So this is a little granular for you, Matt, but introduce this, and can you explain the difference between standard versus higher here?
Yeah, I probably can't get into that delineation. I'm just not that familiar. But the point would be that you're at least setting a base level of what standard is there. And when you're setting it with GPO, it means a user can't go back in and change that down to a lower level, right? So these two that you just showed are actually hand in hand. I can set a list and have the level at nothing. That doesn't help me. I can have no list and have the level set to very high, and that doesn't help me. These two are sisters. They must work together in this case. You have to have both of them, so in my mind.
That's another big thing I want to emphasize about these. GPOs, especially when the last season when we did workstation and server OS hardening, there's so many settings that at Senteon we consider group setting. If you change one setting, love Heath's comment. If you change one setting to follow the rules Microsoft has, you're forced to set another setting to an acceptable range, right? So some of these settings that CIS benchmarks have tie together. Or even contradict each other. So it's important to configure both. Otherwise, you're leaving room for that bad actor to take advantage of you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's all about hardening, right? Because if you know that Zach or myself at some point is going to win, and I'm talking about Zach B in the audience, at some point we're going to win if I want to attack your organization, then your job is to make it hard for us, right? Your job is to make this where I have to work through every single thing I know and go, man, and hopefully you catch us doing that, right? That's the goal. So the more you do these hardening type settings, the better we are. Okay, what's the next one that's not related to that one? What we got?
Yep, we're going to be switching topics a little bit here with this next setting. So next one is going to be allow Google Cast.
No, this is not okay. I want to be able to connect to anything, regardless of what it is. And I don't even care if it's a local IP. In fact, maybe we should also allow people to send SMTP credentials to a calendar invite. Like, let's make. Oh no, we've already played that game. That's Microsoft. Yeah, thank you, Felina. Or I think that was Felina.
So we really like this setting.
I think it's important because what you're saying is by default, my traditional cast services, which could include screencast, which could include, cast of sensitive information, are being allowed to connect to anything, right? And being allowed to connect to anything, any IP. And what you're really saying is, no, let's only allow it to connect to X. And I would imagine there's a corresponding aspect of this that says local networks right here specifically. You could just do all of that local network space, or specific networks. I'd wager there's some configurability to specific subnets that you want to access. And what it really comes down to is, like, if you look at the principles of zero trust, if you try to apply ZTNA, ZT principles, like, just because it can connect, should it? Right? And just because it can connect to anything, should it? No, I should have very specific data flows. I should understand those data flows. And I think, I won't get on my soapbox too much. This is an important one, just in disabling access by default to anything that this device might want to connect to. So
yeah, these settings are all about enhancing that device security, especially this one within like local networks, right?
Yeah.
So, absolutely. 100%. Good summary on that one. Let's hit up the next one.
What we got? Let's do it.
It's like a game for me as well. I made the slides, but I don't memorize these.
I'm about this because one of the things that we look at is, okay, accurate time synchronization is crucial. Agreed, right? And 8.4 is getting into configuring.
This is educational, Matt. Why do we agree on that? Why is time synchronization crucial?
Well, if let's say I'm trying to figure out who stabbed me, and there were people with a knife at given time windows, and then no knife without that time window, but I get my time windows wrong, I might accuse the wrong person of stabbing me. Right? It needs to be the person with the knife in their hand at the time I was actually stabbed. And so what I mean is you have to have all of the different sources agree to some common time, right? And very accurately, so that as we bring log files together, right? And if we look at 8.4 is part of secure configurations. It's also part of log management. But if I get all these different logs with different timestamps, I'm not going to put them back into a real coherent story. I'm going to have a hard time building the kill chain. I'm going to have a hard time understanding how things played out. So 8.4 gets into saying standardized time synchronization, configure at least 2 synchronized time sources across enterprise assets. What I don't know that I am okay with is, and this is me just thinking out loud, Zach, setting time services to Google time services. I don't know that that's what I want. And I don't know if there are other configurabilities that allow me to choose, per se, other NTP sources or things. But left in a pinch, I'd rather it hit some NTP source, network time protocol source, that allows me to have that set. And if Google is the answer in that Google browser, then that's a good thing to have set.
So, I mean, let's go back to what the CIS benchmarks are, right? These CIS benchmarks take the assumption that there is no third-party tool in the environment. An easier example of this to explain is audit policies on a Windows workstation or server. CIS benchmarks will say only to have, for most of them, just success or just failure. But if you do have a robust SIM or log aggregator tool, they're not going to want you to do that because they can handle more noise.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that to say is these CIS benchmarks.
I'll refer you to my yesterday presentation about SIM. Anyways, I digress.
Is that a LinkedIn Live? Because I'll drop that into the comments as well. All right, but that's the point here, right? CIS and all of these settings can be done manually, can be done in-house. You don't even need to purchase another solution.
Well, at least to get to that good enough, right? Like, at least do the thing of, like, I tell people this all the time. My grandfather used to have a saying, and his saying was, "Don't jump me in a rock pile, because I'll sure as shit throw a rock." Right. And I think the reality is, if you're not even using the stuff around you,
so good,
the free rocks around you, then get that in order first, then go buy a tool. And I do believe that's my point, is, like, use the things around you, use the living off the land tools. What I do love about the benchmarks is they do at least take advantage of that portion of, I already know you have Chrome. Let's just set it to what we know needs to be set. I already know you have Edge. Let's just set it to how it needs to be set. Now, as a practitioner, you're going to have to balance that, right? And decide where do I want my time source? Specifically, this might not be the hill you die on, but Maybe you care that it's pool.time.nist or whatever it might be that you're using, right? Pool.ntp.org or whoever it might be that you're using. Never Microsoft, never time.microsoft. Just don't ever use time.microsoft. Sorry, Microsoft, love you. Well, I'm not using it. I digress.
We might have a company because of Microsoft, so we're not going to use a lot of them as well. Anyway, all right. Time synchronization, that makes sense. Any wrap-up comments on this one, or are we moving to the next?
We're good. Get your time in order. All right.
Time in order. Time is valuable. All right. Allow the audio sandbox to run is set to enabled. So CIS is actually saying allowing this to run, right? Because
you're allowing it to be in sandbox. Let's just talk about what is a sandbox.
There you go.
And then I'll also tackle is a simpler browser technically a safer browser, because that's delicious. So what we're getting at is that basically there's abuse capable, and everything you use has abuse capable, right? It goes back to my rock in a rock pile. Like I'm going to throw it at you. It wasn't designed to be a weapon, but it is. And so the point is like they're saying, why would we want the sandbox to run? In this case, sandboxing capabilities allow you to isolate those audio processes from interacting with other sources and other data sets, which means hopefully you're limiting what it can do if I escape out of that by abusing some codec or some processing capability or some flaw in that processing capability. It's just saying sandbox it. In general, sandboxing refers to, maybe containerization is a great way to explain it, but sandboxing is taking and removing the asset that's running from the actual system that it can do damage to, giving it para-virtualization, giving it virtual capabilities that allow it to be sandboxed and controlled. And in this case, what they're saying is just don't let it interact with other things. And that's in Control 8.3. And when we get to Control 8.3, that gets back to, that doesn't make sense. Hold on a second.
Matt, there is a lot of these at Senteon. We just
given as that statement. That's not
good
true.
Thing we have submitted some opinions to CIS about these crosswalks.
Right, I love you. 8.3 is not a good mapping for this. It would probably be closer to 4 something, 4.1 or even 9.1 as an extensibility.
I think a lot of these would be more 4. I mean, if for example to preview a little something you're working on in the background, and again, we will get to this question here.
In the chat. I'll just go ahead and give this away. This is the visuals for CIS. So go.cybermattlee.com/CIS visuals. If you'll pop that in chat back in person, that would be awesome. You guys are welcome to go check those out. But basically, in my mind, just dragging to where I think that would be, Zach, I'm thinking we're going to be living somewhere. You could even, it's not going to be 412. It's definitely going to be like 4.1. That's my guts. Is this going to be 4.1?
I think 4.1 is going to be the best choice for a lot of these.
You might be able to say that, there's just nothing else. I think 8.3 is a weird place to put it, if I'm honest. It's just a strange one. Log management is where we put our decisions to sandbox audio.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm done. I'm off my day.
You're absolutely good. Again, I want to get to this question, but I want to first emphasize this link that we just dropped into that LinkedIn chat. I can have the admins toss it into YouTube as well. But realistically, what we have been working on and what's been going on in the background is a lot of these vendors, MSPs want to map their security stack to CIS. But how do you do that, right? So Matt's taken a huge initiative to outline what makes up a CIS control and then allowing vendors to better attest and validate what that takes. So that link in the LinkedIn chat, please bookmark it. Bob Miller was a huge part of this. But absolutely bookmark that link. Matt, thank you for sharing it as a free resource. And there's your shout out. Let's get to that akin question on simple browser versus technical.
Here's where I get at. Like, I could see a world. You can put this as Matt Lee's prediction. But if everything, especially in the SMB and really even enterprise long-term as brownfield dies, but the SMB that is an identity-centric SMB that then extends into SaaS applications as a predominance, doesn't have line of business application running on compute, things aren't running local compute, you're not doing things in that nature. As you see that being a larger bell curve of the populace, and that becomes more real, then why do I care about an OS? Like, at some point, would I not be able to function in a hardened browser? And you've even seen motions like Island and other players that are developing a browser that hides key obfuscation, right? Like, one of the things that even when you use a virtual machine, I'm just going to steal your keystrokes. I'm just going to take them from the local machine. But now they're doing key obfuscation where they inject back in the HID structure bad characters, like 73 CRs and Ts, along with my one little T that's in there, right? Like, you might see that it makes it very tough for you to get data out of that. They're being very, very very pragmatic in that approach. And so back to your core question, is a simpler browser technically a safer browser? The less shit I turn on, the less rocks I get hit in the face with. And I think as you get into simpler architectures and simpler needs and less need for diversity of how I connect, and think about what born a browser. A browser was born to connect in all the stupid ways your stupid sysadmin decided to do, right? Like you can still use legacy HTTPS protocols. You can still use all kinds of broken things still. But you could argue that if you started looking at only serving that future populace and only serving common protocols in Web3 and HTTPS or HTTP, I just have less stuff on, and therefore it'd have less attack surface. So I would say, Ken, in my mind, that a safe browser is probably a simpler browser. So take that and say Matt Lee quoted that. But yeah, I do believe long-term probably is, yes.
You know, in a lot of your explanation there and your reasoning, it was talking about the security aspect of all these CIS benchmarks and all these recommendations. By having a hardened system, does this actually assist with productivity, or does it have any outside benefits other than security?
I think it's a byproduct of predictability. And what I mean by that is, yes, we're making security there, but we're also making less chances for things to happen. Like, let's talk back to LLM&R. What is LLM&R? It's a local lookup with IPv6 after other processes fail, but it actually happens on all processes. Well, if I can just drop that and only use the one that is meant to be the one we're functioning in, I have less things to hide the fact that I'm not functioning, right? Let's say I'm connecting because I can get a name from an LLM&R lookup comparative to actually having DNS problems, right? So I do think that long-term, the more you harden a browser, the better the productivity can be. But it also goes hand in hand with the normalization of the user experience in general. What I mean by that, if I'm signing in with SSO and I'm using OAuth or OIDC or SAML, and I sign in, like the authentication flow is the same every time. The way I'm connecting is the same every time. The browser experience is functional the same way every time. I have less layers of dependency. Now, if I can make that the same thing happen and reduce other auth methods, other attack methods, and make your user experience exactly the way I want it to be, and that if you suddenly go to the wrong page, it does weird shit, but if you go to the right one, it's fine. Like, those things are going to be predictors of our security posture, but should also enhance productivity. And maybe I'm just saying that to try to make the board members happy, and maybe I'm just using my board member hat. But I genuinely believe, think about this. If I had a task and your only job was to fire up an application once and use it and shut it down, and the first application was Wolfenstein 3D in DOS, and the other application was Angry Birds on a cell phone, which one has less chance of failing every time I launch it? It's going to be the Angry Birds, the web-delivered HTTPS app method with highly controlled variables, highly normalized experiences on iPhone or Android of this flavor. It connects in this infrastructure to this SaaS cloud. The level of that predictability goes massively up. And instead of me having to deal with force function levels, which wouldn't have existed in DOS, so like that's not what we're really talking about, but dealing with all these different variables, I now just have the variable of, do I have connectivity? Do I have the settings set correctly, and can I connect out and authenticate? So anyways, that's a long way away from these nerdy slides.
No, that's good. And we do have like 6 settings, but I can't help myself. I have to ask one more, almost a little, I don't know if it's controversial. I don't know where you'll take this question, but in your response, you mentioned predictability. When we talk about EDRs, all EDRs and behavior analysis and behavior monitoring, right? By having a hardened system, do you believe that it would increase the efficacy of EDRs?
100%. Here's why. I've got less anomalous things that can work. I don't have weird connections on WinSCP. I don't have these. They just don't work. That means that my attack surface and where I choose to fight. And I like to make this connection to warfare and in the olden days. If you think about the British method of warfare, pre-colonial war, and us taking that aspect, it wasn't guerrilla warfare. It was 2 blokes set up, lined up, and shot at each other with some level of predictability, right? Like you basically had line up and shoot. You knew where that battle was going to occur. It was going to occur right there in that field. But when you started getting into guerrilla warfare, it was very hard to defend against, because I could just be in that tree and shoot you. I could just be over there in that little hole and shoot at you. We could maybe put a bomb over here. Like, there was stuff you could do that wasn't predictable. In fact, it was seen as like not in the valor of warfare, and it changed warfare completely. I'm proposing we change warfare back in this case, where I know where you're going to hit me. You're going to hit me at this authentication capability from this protocol, because it's the only one I left open.
From that exposed lid, you're going to get hit by your keyboard and your coffee.
Yeah. Luckily, though, there was a partially closed lid, and so I'm only having to clean up the napkins worth of my. This is risk transference. This is risk transference, Jack. I knew.
A visual demonstration. Talk about a season opener.
All right, I get that. Let's get on with the settings.
That's perfect. Get on with the settings. All right, this next setting here, this one, I find interesting. Why? Because the end client will notice. This is one they will probably, I don't know your audience, but they may complain about, right? When I click download today, or rather before we hardened our browsers, it would just download and then I'd open the file. Now the CIS benchmarks are asking you to add an additional step every single time. Matt, why does this matter?
Because it makes you be intentional. Right? Like when you think about this, if we're asking users, I'm guilty of this, Zach. I'm guilty of this. Where did I save that? I don't know. I just clicked through the stupid thing and click save. What if that was PII? What if that was PHI? What if that was sensitive information? What if that was something I shouldn't be saving that way? And so when you think about it, in my mind, making a user be intentional and have to click, I want to save this here, hopefully gives you the ability to educate users to be intentional, right? To educate people to say, hey, listen, think about what you're saving. Like, should I save it? And if I should save it, where should I save it? Now, I don't know that I would get arguable about asking where to save, because in general, it should save in the downloads folder. You could set that type of behavior and have some predictability there. I do like this ask where to save before downloading, because it makes the user think. It makes the user stop and be intentional. That's my take on this.
You know, the big thing in
mapped. Let me take my poke at mapping this. I would probably say this again falls in 4.1. I'm being a cheater. 4.1's an easy one.
4.1 is the go-to. But Matt, in your response to your explanation on this setting, it was education and, you know, letting the user know. Isn't that like security culture? Can the CIS benchmarks help inform and create a better security culture at a business?
Yeah. Well, there's an old mantra that I've always followed, which is, we got to make it harder for users to do the wrong thing and easier for users to do the right thing. Now, I think I'll attribute that back to Chris Krebs. But the point is if we can make it to where we control that user experience and we control that the barriers and what they can and can't do, but even when they can do something, we make it something intentional. And you're not wrong. Somebody said some will have issues. This may be a problem. People don't like it. I think to your point, that's where you'll find that culture problem, right, Zach? I think that's where you'll find where we have a gap in our education. We have a gap in our governance. We have a gap in our intention as a company. And again, I don't think security can be a culture. I'll get in trouble for this. I don't think you can have a security culture, but I do think that you can have a culture of making your bed. And what I mean by that is there's an Army general or I think it was Navy general. Oh goodness, now I feel terrible. That did a talk at an MIT commencement that said life's about making your bed. And he goes on to say that it shows posture. It lets you accomplish something every day. It lets you understand. But really what I think it does is it shows intention. And I think it shows that people are doing something the right way. And I think when we think about what making you click here or taking your training or getting that, it's not the culture itself, but it's evident of an understanding of your responsibility with your technology. And that is something you can only do well through a culture, I think. So I guess I kind of came back around on myself there. But.
You got yelled at the board, then you won the board back. That's what a good leader does.
It's always about motion. You know, Zach, it's always about motion. And Bob said 96% of failures are the system, 4% the worker, from Dr. Deming. I agree with that. And if I remember, Deming goes back into like the research of workers' motion and how they function and efficiencies and things of that nature. And so in my mind, that's exactly right. If I make it easier where you know that this is going to ask you to download, yes, it might default to that same folder you've been using, but then you know intentionally where you placed that. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox on this one. This one does have user pushback, I believe. And I think it takes education and governance to make this function right.
I agree with that too. And I think I'm going to have to do another episode more about who owns the security culture, right? Because I had Felicia on last week and she said it has to start with HR, which is very interesting, right? And then it led to saying like managers need to control security, even if they're not, you know, the CISO or anything else. They need to manage the security of their subordinates, but not enough time to go deep into that, Matt.
Was that Felicia King?
Yes, Felicia was last week's guest.
She's the first person I ever got into an argument with about cyber where she was 100% right and I was 100% wrong. We'll save that for another story.
All right, we got a joint webinar coming up with Matt and Felicia coming. So
right too, guys, she knows it.
She's absolutely fabulous. All right, the next setting here, I do believe we have about 5 more settings, so we're crushing time a little close.
Background apps when what? Duh, stupid. Like I don't know if you wanted like.
Why is this stupid? Why is this duh?
Let me see. I want something spawned by a shitty browser to be able to run when I close that host process. Maybe not. maybe just a skosh not. Like maybe not. I want it all.
Tell me when I leave my house for the day, I don't want just someone to stay in the house like that.
No. Yeah, you're good. No, genuinely though, what we're getting at is background apps, things that run, like that could be your password broker, or password browse storage. That could be your stupid Grammarly. That could be whatever the hell it is you've decided to put in that browser. And now you're saying, let that guy keep working. Like when I close this thing down, I want them to be able to keep collecting data about me. I want them to be able to keep, like, they got to be able to function in their world to sell my data the most. Like, no, I just don't think so. So in my mind, it would be closing that down and removing that loophole. And let's just cross-check their 4.8 mapping on this, right? So 4.8 is saying that we have to uninstall or disable unnecessary services. I
think that's okay.
Agree. I think this actually would probably have been more applicable to some of the other things, but yeah, I don't disagree. I'd take that. Unnecessary services. You're basically saying it can't operate in the background outside the browser. So it's probably a stretch. I would say it's definitely a 4.1 extensibility, like how I should configure things. But other than that, I can't think of where else it would map.
Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, all right.
Next setting here, and I want to emphasize this setting. It is the first level 2 setting of season 3.
I can't do this. No.
So be careful with this setting. Obviously, it is a recommendation, and honestly, the recommendation sounds pretty good. But be careful. Level 2 is going to very likely cause disruption. That's why it's a level 2. But control safe sites, adult content filtering, making sure this is enabled. Matt, talk about this.
You know, man, you got to take care of work. You got to make work safe for everybody. So the point here is disabling adult content filtering is trying to take safe sites. And I think what you're seeing here is I would probably solve this in 12 other ways. But
yes,
the way we're being solved is, again, back to your point, and the whole point of benchmarks is like, let's just let people do with their rocks that are in the rock pile what they need to do here. And instead of me going and buying a DNS filtering service that bolts at the actual system level, that does my DNS filtering, they're just saying, let's just let the browser have these like top level domains that we're going to scrub. The reason I don't think that's effective enough, but it is a good start, is back to even its point that it calls out. Like we can't stop iframes. It's not doing anything with the DNS layer. It's only doing it at the top layer of the browser level, even though it has deeper understanding. And usually browser level plugins will do a deeper job than Chrome would in this case. However, if you think back to when I can't remember the Privacy Act for schools. What was the one that came in like the 90s that forced all schools
I should know this.
Search? Like that made it really tough. In fact, the rule didn't say it had to work. It just said you had to have one. So a lot of people just took this real shitty one that didn't work. But the point was free. But the point is, in this case, you're saying, hey, let's at least use parts of a layer. Bob says it well, not a whole solution, just another layer. But I think it is one of those that you can implement. And I want to take you back to my beliefs on what is cybersecurity, Zach. My belief in cybersecurity is you're never going to stop me. I'll get someone hired. I'll compromise somebody before they start with you. Like there's ways for me to win. I'm going to win. Well, then how do you win? You win by being defensible in the actions you took. You win by being reasonable in the way you approach something. Well, having a free setting, not turning it on, is not reasonable. Now, the questionability of whether you deal with adult content or not safe for work is probably not the part I want to hammer that on, but it really is this understanding of you can filter certain things. It'd be really nice to show a judge and jury that you were, right? Oh, that was free and you turned it on. That's pretty cool. And you turned that one on and you did this one. You did these things. Like you're doing that thing. We can allow if needed. Yeah, as long as they can access work-related sites, we can allow if needed. Yeah, and you know, maybe your work-related sites are iframing in porn, but it's not like it's probably going to be they're actually stopping it at the TLD layer.
Absolutely.
All right, good stuff.
All right, let's keep this going on through. So the next setting here is determine the availability of variations is set to disabled. I mean, we talked about this kind of at the beginning, right? You want to know what's going on and not allow a lot of different styles.
I don't know what variations are in this context, so maybe I'll just claim ignorance to this setting. I'm not sure what they mean by variation specifically.
There we go. Let me double check my notes here. So
that'd be awesome. I'll tell you if I believe it then.
So
I do like if they're mapping it to 7.4, which is talking about app updates and patch management. My gut says like there might be a scenario where you could have multiple variable versions of Chrome running, and this is to block that. Is that my understanding of this?
Yeah. So this is like allowing like where we can test and utilize different Chrome functionalities to see which configuration provides the best balance, right? So this is the user actually getting to choose the optimal setup, I believe, which, as you can imagine, not great.
Yeah. Okay, so variations is just their horrible way of saying don't let users configure this browser.
I believe that is correct.
Well, if that is the case, then it doesn't map to 7.4 because 7.4 speaks towards patch management. In my mind, 7.4 would be meaning like versions of the browser. Yeah.
I would love to go into the differences between patch management and hardening, but we only have an hour webinar.
Yeah,
another topic.
But 7.4 that they call out is a patch management safeguard speaking towards application updates of enterprise assets. And my gut says, anyways, but yeah, the variations. Me and these guys are going to have some talk about the mappings. I guess I
will join every single one of those conversations. Okay. And the engineers on my side would thank you for landing those meetings. Anywho.
Well, I will.
All right. Next setting here. I mean, you saw my CIS test results with Senteon. We were mapping to control 14, which I know you'd probably heavily disagree with, but that's what the CIS benchmarks say.
So legacy cert authorities can be less secure. Disabling enforcement for legacy CAs ensures reliance on more secured, updated, and certificate authorities. So basically saying, don't allow me to go back to an older CA when a newer CA is available. Yeah,
that's exactly what that is.
I agree. I'm in. You sold me. Not explicitly mapped. I would probably say, I don't know exactly where it'd fall other than 401. So yeah, that's fair. I would probably say they should have mapped a lot of these to 4 and just configuration management.
Yep.
But yeah. All right.
Go. Keeping pace. The next one here. Disable certificate transparency enforcement for a list of subject public key info hashes. Set to disabled, which again, double negative. So this is actually enabling the enforcement.
Yeah. Enforcement of expired certificates, right? Yeah. Yeah. Fair. Cool. Good. Yes. Agreed.
Any comments other than agreeing?
You want to keep secure shit wrapped in secure stuff? This is killing me right now. I don't believe you, Zach. But if we're Microsoft, we can just take those keys and just store them in our logs for less sensitive Oh, never mind. I digress. It's okay. Yeah, continue.
All right. Awesome. And this next setting here is going to be the last setting of the episode, and it's going to tie back to the previous two as well, right? So disable certificate transparency enforcement for a list of URLs. Again, disable and disable, double negative.
You're just basically not letting people set a certificate enforcement removal. And think about it. When somebody goes to a browser and it's got a broken certificate, that's what this is stopping you from being able to set transparency. Like saying, nope, I'm cool. Just bypass this. It's probably fine. No, it's probably not fine. It's my Wi-Fi pineapple in the corner. Or if it's, you know what I mean? Or AITM that I've used with a bad cert, which now it's just so easy for me to sign my stuff anyway. I try to sign it, and let's use Let's Encrypt for its free awesomeness of that. But the point being is this at least lets you stop people from blindly blocking and saying, no, I don't care if this one site. And you've done it, right? We've all done this as practitioners where you're like having this one problem, the one EMR won't update this one core cert. We're just going to bypass it. Well, now it means anybody emulating it can bypass it, right? So all I have to do is say, I'm this URL. And if I can trick your DNS, or if I can trick your end client, or if I can trick whatever it may be into going there, then now my cert will match, right? Because it won't care that my cert doesn't match. Anyways, so yeah.
Absolutely. So that is the settings section for today. We have about 3 minutes left. If we can pull up this next slide, Matt, at a high level, we just talked about all the security defense measures that a blue team can do. Switching gears, attacker point of view, these CIS benchmarks also map to the MITRE attack techniques. So I have the technique numbers in the bottom right, and then the listed on the front.
Which will also map to Red Canary's project, which allows you to do Atomic Red Team. And what's cool about Atomic Red Team is it allows you to emulate these TTPs by number, T1555, through their tool sets, right? And emulate to see if it's going to stop it and test your systems. And I think the point you're trying to make is when we have a MITRE defend, there are MITRE attack techniques that then one-to-one map to those that we should be able to emulate and explain. And if nothing else, it allows you to play with the football in your head and understand why. One of the things I think people get wrong all the time, and the reason I spend so much time in the red team side of things in my own learning, is we would never, ever, ever go play sports and be a football coach for defense and go, nah, bro, I didn't have to understand how people do things on offense. I'm good, man. I got this. I'm going to stop them all the yards. That never happens. You go learn deeply how offense is played as a defender because you need to understand how you're going to defend. We are ignorant in our own choice to not do that. And I think you highlight a good point of this. Don't just say you're a blue teamer, right? Think about things from that attack side. Try to understand it. If you don't understand it more, because then you'll understand the importance of what you're doing. That's why I went down this path. That's why I spend so much time on my Try Hack Me every night and doing my tests and things, is to understand that. And I'll go a little bit further. Jason Slagle, myself, Tom Lawrence, and John Hammond are doing a talk called The Hackening. in October at Wild West Hackin' Fest. And we're taking 52 MSPs that have volunteered to let us attack them and doing a data study project. Like, how many of them have hanging A records that I can take over? How many of them have poor SPF management? How many of them give me away their IPs in their SPF? How many have? And so we're doing a data study. And I think the data, just the short data we already have, it's really bad. Like, it's really bad, Zach. And it shows that they're not making their bed. Right.
I mean, that's something that I really want to do. And Senteon is trying to perform some case studies on this, but performing various MITRE ATT&CK techniques against a default box versus a hardened box, right?
Sure.
So very much in the same vein.
For you. Yeah, totally.
So,
totally.
All right, very last slide. Obviously, we have to talk about the attack slide. Matt, summary for the MSPs in the audience today. We emphasize this throughout the whole episode, but should MSPs talk to their clients about browser hardening? And is anything on this slide accurate, or did I just make it all up to sell Senteon?
So I'm going to break you here and say, no, I don't think people should talk to their client about browser hardening. I think people should harden the browser.
Okay, so the conversation isn't as critical?
In my opinion, Zach, I didn't find value in trying to educate an unwilling student in a subject they didn't give a shit about things they cannot understand, and asked me to be the expert in. Well, if you're asking me to be expert, then I'm going to go fucking change it. Yep. I'm going to go set it the way it should be. And if I do need to explain, I'll deal with that as an exception bias, as opposed to trying to teach everyone. In my opinion, if you try to teach everyone, yes, there's a certain amount of hearts and minds you have to have. Yes, there's a certain amount of trust. Yes, there's a certain amount of those things. But I do think that at some point, you just have to be the practitioner. And if you're going to start doing these things, you might say to your client, hey, browser hardening is important. We're going to choose which browser we're going to use as an organization. Like, you might talk about those things, but the individual settings of cross-site scripting, let me explain to you how cross-site scripting works. You see, what happens is we're going to have this.
You send them to this webinar.
Like, it's never going to happen, right? And so you in my mind have to just be that practitioner and make those choices, and then deal with education where you have to.
And Matt, I'll push back a little bit for your input. I mean, you were an MSP at one point with Iconic. Like, is this something you just kind of did, or were you a little nervous when you were an MSP, right? You don't want to lose that client.
Those aren't mutually exclusive. Okay. Those aren't mutually exclusive. But the first time I ever did this, we were looking at adding mail protection. Everybody was in Office 365 pretty early. This would have been 2017, probably 2016. We were really early in the BPOS to M3 or O365 days. And so we realized they weren't backing up, right? Microsoft added in their EULA, hey, we don't back this shit up. It's like, whoa, what? What do you mean it's in my best interest to back it up? And so we had two choices in front of us. I could either go sell it to, at that time, I think we only had about 5,000 endpoints. I could go sell it to those 5,000 humans and say, I need to talk to you about your email backup. No, what you need to understand is backup is not, or I could just say, hey, we're turning on email backup because Microsoft doesn't back it up. Please let me know if you do not want to pay the $3 a mailbox. How many people do you think when I sent that message came and wanted to talk to me, Zach? Out of 100, how many people wanted to talk to me?
5.
It was 3. And of those 3, only 1 didn't do it. And they weren't a client much longer, right? Wow. And the reality was, what I found was, imagine the other side of that. Now I'm going to go talk to everybody. Hey, this is Bill. I'm your account manager. Can we set up a meeting? Not this week. Okay, next Tuesday. Yeah, cool. No, let's do 2. You're going to cancel. You have doctors. Okay, how about 2 Tuesdays from now? I'm going to go chase down 100 companies that way and get their permission. Which one makes my run rate better? Which one makes my actual time to seeing some benefit of what I'm doing better? And at the time, we were getting crushed on email takeovers. We did similar things with firewalls. We did similar things with settings. We did, like early days, we made it to where your VPN had to be, MFA'd. And they're like, well, this is terrible. And I'm like, well, then fire me. I think the balance you come into is, I would wager the fear of being fired is higher than the actual reality, and that the revenue savings and pain you reduce as you choose those self-selected winners. Not everybody's got to live, Zach. Every one of the companies out there today doesn't have to survive. That is not a foregone conclusion. We just need to pick which one wins, and we need to protect them the best we can. And that's going to be the one self-selectedly putting on the body armor at the end of the day. So I don't need to. And it also goes along with, like, you can drag a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. No, but I can drown that sumbitch and choose where he dies. Right? like I can make this something that's solved for this horse. I don't have to wonder what part of the desert he's going to strand me in. I know now. I digress.
You got your grandpa tossing you on a pile of rocks and dead horses drowning. I mean, this webinar had it all. Absolutely. And to kind of wrap up my closing thoughts, and Matt, I'm going to hand it back to you one last time before we close the episode. You were talking about a lot of this, the client has to do this, or you'll save money by them not doing it. And moderator, I will have one more slide. So keep that available. a lot of our partners over at Senteon, when we talk about hardening, they're starting to send an email that is more of an opt-out as opposed to an opt-in.
Problems with that. There's problems with that. I did it too.
Okay.
Okay, opt out, sign here, and I'll stop bothering you. It's like, hey, by the way, I know you're a child and there's a street out there, and like you shouldn't walk out in traffic, but if you're going to ignore me, just sign this and little Johnny can get hit by a car. Like at some point you take culpability for being the person to let them sign that. Yikes. My only advice I'd give is if you're going to send an opt out, you cannot stop bugging them about it. You need to still show that you are trying to make them change until the point you fire them. And the argument is if you just let me sign away my risk and you're like, I accept my risk, I'm fine. And I'm a practitioner telling you that's okay. And I never mention it again. When you get popped by that, I should have said something. No doctor can go, Matt, I know you're going away against the medical advice and you've got cancer. And if you, well, I'll still see you. Just hang out here and we'll just not talk about it ever again. You keep smoking. In fact, you can smoke right here if you'd like. Why don't you fire one up in the waiting room? Nobody does that. They eventually go, it's not worth my practice and my professional career to protect someone who's not going to protect themselves, right? And they say, Matt signed against the medical advice and he left. So I know where you're going with this, and I did do that. I used to send out that warning. I still think there's value in it from that shock factor and making someone understand what they're doing. I still think there's that. You just can't show that you gave up afterwards. I think as a practitioner, if you make that signature, the I'm fine, I'm not going to do this to the customer, what do they think? I don't have to do this now. Even if I did that, I'd say, you might be signing this, but I'm only getting you to sign this to protect me. I'm going to send you another one next month and next month. Why? Because it matters. Well, shit, man, that's all you had to say. If my attorney asked me to sign something every month that says I know I'm fucked, probably going to have to change attorneys or change the way I think.
I like that. I mean,
better at.
Just because they don't, maybe they do opt out, but it's not the end of that story. If you find a security layer that is so critical, like hardening, I think after this episode, everyone would agree, that's something you need to hammer and need to make happen, not just from the security and risk point of view, but operational internally. Your engineers are now going to know this setting needs to be set to this and XYZ. It's no longer a mashed up mixture of 3 different puzzles that you're trying to put together in one, right? Yeah. That's impossible. So absolutely wanted to kind of wrap it up on that. But Matt, closing thoughts to you, man. What'd you think of your first webinar guest on here?
You know, Zach, anytime I get to hang out with you, it makes me happy in my heart. So that's the first piece of it. But I think getting very technical and tactical is what we're wanting to do more. I'm actually changing mine and Dom's show. We were very news and topic oriented. And I think we're just going to get deeper into the actual nerdy bits, right? The nerdy bits are what matters. And I think for a lot of the people in this populace, it matters to them to see it that way. So I think it's great. I like the nerdy bits. They make me happy. So,
awesome. Yeah. I will drop that link into the LinkedIn chat as well. And let's wrap up here. So we do this weekly webinar series. Honestly, all these slides, all of this is just out of my own free time, as we call it, as any entrepreneur does, right? Please take advantage of these slides. If you want the slides, I do have summaries and wrap-ups, and I even allow you to download the slides, and I do tweak them to be a little bit more educational, so you may even be able to send it externally. Educate your clients. Matt might push back on that because you don't want them to know too much. But again, it depends on the relationship.
I just don't think they can.
So these episodes are streaming on our website, on YouTube. I really do appreciate if you guys do subscribe to that. Really want these to get out there, right? There's no gain to it from us here other than spreading that education. If you do enjoy this webinar series, interested in Senteon, we do have a free offer for catching the webinar episode. You can get 100 free assessments, see where you currently sit, see where your clients sit, and get a sales presentation completely free to show your clients about hardening. All right, next week, we're going to be diving into browsers, downloads, and privacy settings a little bit more with Heather Noggle, and we got 2 more episodes up after that. This season on Chrome hardening has 10 parts, and we are really excited for part 2 next week. Thank you, Matt, for kicking us off, man.
Thank y'all for being here. Appreciate you. Good to see you, Andy Laren, and I'll get more passionate, bro. I promise.